Hello, and thank you for joining us today for the NewMR and Ayda webinar. I'm delighted to be here, and over the next 15 minutes or so, we will look at participant crisis facing the industry and ways forwards, ways that we can solve this. We'll begin by looking at the market forces that got us here, the impact on research operations, so participant recruitment, management, the sort of back end, if you like, of research, how we got here, so the part that we have played as an industry, what would happen if we continued doing as we have always done, and then we'll look at positive ways forwards and actions that we can take now to resolve. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Shifra Cook. I'm CEO and founder of Ayda. We are a B2B SaaS platform that is on a mission to improve participants' experience of taking part in research. Specifically, what we do is we deliver solutions for research operations that make researchers' time more productive and the participants' experience better. To give you a bit of background on me, I spent much of my career in media and advertising, where I was creating proprietary research platforms and establishing in-house insight functions. Latterly, I founded a research agency, and throughout this time, I've had first-hand experience of the growing participant crisis, from analysing survey results that were delivering questionable findings despite having robust and expensive sample, to running consumer workshops or large-scale qual projects where I'd be met with disengaged, disingenuous, or even worse, professional participants in the room that were meant to be strangers but arrived in the same car and left together holding hands. So, of course, I'm not saying that all research participants are like this. We'd definitely be in a lot worse position if that was the case. But the fact that this happened at all, the fact that the sponsors for the research were going to be basing their findings, basing their insights and strategic developments in their business off the back of data that would have to be severely cleaned really bothered me. I thought, how can that be okay? I'm sure there are no other industries that I've heard of where that would be acceptable behaviour. So I set about doing something about it, and that's why I founded Ayda. So what we do is we're all about essentially reimagining the participant experience to deliver better for them and ultimately better for the researcher and for research. But first of all, do we really have a participant crisis? They're sort of, all hyped up. Is it hype? And if we do, how is it impacting research? Well, what we see at the moment in terms of market forces are three clear market forces that are driving us towards a crisis in terms of participants. And that is an increased demand for data and insights. Obviously, we know there's been a huge amount of change in the world and continues to be a huge amount of change and uncertainty. And this has driven up the need and demand for more insight from organizations. They're looking for more advice. They're looking for more connection with their consumers really than ever before. And that demand is fantastic, but what has happened is that the supply of participants hasn't risen to meet that increased demand. So there is a demand gap that's not being fulfilled, and it's bringing to light really some of the cracks that exist in our industry, most notably the quality or veracity of some of the people that are taking part. And thirdly, there are increasing concerns around data privacy backed up by changes in legislation. We know about GDPR and the California Consumer Privacy Act from 2018, but now in the US there's an uptick in legislation as other states respond to the growing demand for transparency and data privacy from their citizens. Interestingly, according to a recent study by KPMG looking at consumer data collection, a whopping 86% of people said that they feel a growing concern about data privacy. So these three elements combined are having a significant impact on the industry at large, both qual and quant. Obviously they're different fields, but the impact is being felt maybe in different ways, but it is still the same problem. On quant, we're finding fraud, whether that's bots or repeats, quality being such that I've heard 20 to 30% at a minimum in terms of completions are having to be thrown out. We're also finding that there are lower completion rates than before in quant. In qual, we're seeing a lack of new recruiters, certainly in the UK and Europe. Their lack of new people coming in to actually be on the ground to find and connect with people to bring into the research. And that is driving a shrinking participant pool. And then we're also seeing from the research sponsors increasingly stringent criteria and demand for quotas on diversity, which is absolutely right, but then incredibly hard to fulfill. And as a result, we are in essence overworking the same people, which means that insights and decisions and strategic ways forward for companies are essentially being driven by a smaller and ever decreasing and smaller group of people. Does this matter? I believe it absolutely does. Participants are foundational for primary research. Without them, there's no data, no analysis, there is no insight for primary research, and yet we've ignored this topic for so long. I'm sure it's sort of flared up every so often as new regulation, GDPR, etc., has sort of come up, but it's never really had the focus and attention that it deserves, given that people are the lifeblood of the research industry. Instead, it's been seen often as a sort of messy, maybe a dark art that's sort of towards the bottom of the research food chain. But I don't believe that we can continue to keep burying our heads in the sand. This doesn't have an easy solution. It requires new thinking, it requires attention to resolve, but it must be given attention if we're going to meet the demand, which obviously we want to do, and deliver quality output in an ethical way that adheres to privacy legislation. We played a part in this. It's not just market forces. There's been very much a focus on faster and cheaper, a focus in innovation and technology, in new methodologies in research has been driven by this demand for insights to be delivered faster and cheaper. And in that, the participant experience has been sidelined. They've been, people have become commoditized as quotas to fill. So all of our focus has been on the craft of the research, the output, not the input. The design of methodologies and data collection have been the focus. What new methodology, what new technology will catch the interest of the sponsor? And this has been evident from the proliferation of tech platforms from data collection. I think Mike Stevens said at the last count on insight platforms, there's over 1,200 tech platforms listed in his database. Predominantly, all of those focusing on data collection methodology, less than a handful focusing on research operations and the participant experience. And to fuel this already sort of difficult situation, we've talked about the use of personal data and privacy as a growing concern. People obviously appear to have no qualms sharing their life on social media, but when it comes to sharing their information with organisations, there are very real concerns around this. Again, from this KPMG study, recent KPMG study, it's found that over 40% of consumers that were surveyed said that they don't trust companies to use their data ethically. There's certainly a breakdown of trust here. So what happens if we keep going down the same path? Well, if we don't start paying attention to participants and the participant experience, will essentially undermine the foundations of primary research. The participant pool will become increasingly restricted, the data output will become increasingly less representative of society, and this is at a time when diversity and representation need to come to the fore. So it really sounds like quite a dire situation unless we begin to address this. So what is the solution? Well, a good place to start is to go to the source. talk with the people that are taking part in research. So that's exactly what we did at Ayda. We conducted a study of almost 2,000 research participants to better understand what their experience was like when taking part in research and what was important to them when doing so. The findings, although not necessarily entirely groundbreaking or revolutionary, were certainly very interesting for us. The speed of reward and the choice of reward coming out 1 and 3. Now, we completely understand people don't give their time and give their input for free. It's about quick and fair remuneration of participants. But I'd say, are we doing the right thing by them if we only ever allow them to claim in vouchers? Now, we might say if it's cash, there's an increased potential for fraud. I would dispute that, because in order to claim in cash, people will need to, or direct to bank transfer, people will need to disclose further information for KYC purposes. That's what we do on Ayda. But still, what we give participants the choice of how to claim, whether that's vouchers or direct to bank, and 95% of people choose to put their reward direct in their bank account, and they have to give further information in order to do so, but they are willing to do that in order to have the cash in their bank. And that additional information, although it's only used for the purposes of processing payment, allows us to do additional checks against fraud, because obviously you can't take money direct to your bank if you're a fraudster, or obviously we have to mitigate against that. So we all know about breakages. I would have thought that, you know, organisations, what they do is they like unclaimed incentives, because essentially that money comes straight back onto their bottom line. And also when buying vouchers, the face value of a voucher isn't actually its true value. You obviously bulk buy and then you get a percentage discount. But in doing that and in cutting those corners, really we're not delivering the best for participants and giving them what they want. And so is it any surprise that if we're not doing right by them, why would they feel the necessity to do the same for us? What we also see here is this, from a qual perspective, an ease of communication with researchers coming in second in terms of what's important to participants when taking part in research. We find here that, you know, certainly in the UK and Europe, that there's a sort of long chain of people from the participant through to the research sponsor. So there may be several on-the-ground recruiters, there may be then fieldwork agencies, there may be then research agencies, there may be then also the research sponsor themselves. And within that chain, the communication with the participant can be very disparate, can be quite broken, and can be quite difficult, really. And so again, this is something that needs reimagining and thinking about as part of solving the participant crisis. This is nicely sort of summed up by one of our customers, Criteria Fieldwork, so the managing director there, James Sainsbury, and he says, you know, there are clients and other stakeholders whom they work with to make sure that they have a positive experience of the research process, but participant experience is sometimes overlooked. And over time, this can erode trust, enthusiasm, and willingness to take part. They're looking for open, clear, respectful communication, prompt and fair payment, which are key to ensuring that participants feel valued. And it's fantastic that we're working with Criteria and ensuring this for them. But I think that this is not necessarily a commonly held or commonly done, I'd say, or done enough within our industry. I'd also add to this that where feasible, it's important for us to provide information on the topic and potentially the business that the participant will be doing the research on behalf of, and not to mention clear communication on the personal data that's collected, how it will be stored, how it will be used, a very clear understanding and an ethical, transparent relationship that in terms of participant use of participant data. So at Ayda, we take a service design approach to the participant experience. What does that mean? It means flipping our perspective so that we see the participant journey in research almost as a service that we're fulfilling to the people that are taking part, as much as them providing one to us. So an exchange that goes beyond basic monetary compensation. It's about co-creating the experience. So our product and the platform we've created not just with customers as strategic partners, but also with participants to ensure that we're providing for people that are potentially not very technically savvy or accessibility users. And again, just simple, clear communication, very transparent, with an understanding of how their data is stored, that they have given consent, that they have opted in, and that they can see essentially the data that is held on them. So we take very much a holistic approach here to enable researchers to have positive relationships that create trust and that, you know, built around security of data. So what do we actually do? I mean, it all sounds really good. What we actually do is we put in our customers' hands the ability to house their participant data, so to store it, and then from that central participant relationship management, or PRM as we call it, to then take participants through an end-to-end workflow that also encompasses payment. So we don't actually do the research, we sit either side of the research to enable an exemplary participant experience that means that participants are retained, treated fairly, paid fairly, give consent, and have transparency over their data and how their data is used. And what we've done here is we've shifted the focus in here from output, so the output of the research, to input to the participants. And I think that that ultimately is what needs to happen in the industry. We need to look at what we are putting in, essentially, into the exciting platforms that we are using for new methodologies and the sort of faster and cheaper ways of doing research. We need to look at ways that we can improve the participant experience. And all of that way that we engage with society will help to change the perceptions of research and the perceptions of taking part in research, which will open us up to, or open up the possibility of taking part to more people and to more diverse people, and enable us really to engage at a different level with participants. And in doing that, I believe that we will have less bad actors, we will have less fraud to solve. It will be there, but I don't think it will be as prevalent. And what we need to do, first of all, is open up the possibility of taking part in research much more broadly to society. And in doing that, we will solve the participant crisis. So that is my perspective on the participant crisis and how we would essentially solve that. Please, I look forward to answering questions from you all, and thank you for your attention over the last 18 minutes or so.